Hello and welcome everyone. We are the doubleWbrothers and Pony-Berserker.
Hello.
It's really great you have come to see our presentation today about the next step in the evolution of Pony.
Doors are closed, there is no going back.
Well, no. As the title of our presentation says, this panel will be about parodies, since that is what we are known for. And since we do parodies of My Little Pony, all our examples will of course be related to MLP, also because this is a brony convention. We want to talk today about our theories, how parodies and humor work in general, and show examples of what we mean using our comics. Please keep in mind that we are not scientists or anything like that.
Actually, when it comes to being a scientist, I'm actually educated in literary analysis, and I had literature for 2 or more years at university, so I feel I'm competent and educated enough to validate all our research and say it's how it is.
Yeah. Well, all our theories are based on our personal experience and our own attempts at analyzing why some things worked and others not. Also, you can't always trust a scientist.
And technically, we are not scientists because basically literary analysis isn't science. It's just art or something like that. So.
Well, but before we start, just some information about us. We are, like said, the doubleWbrothers from Germany and Pony-Berserker from Poland.
That's me.
We started to watch MLP in the year 2012 and started to upload comics in 2013.
I actually started uploading comics in 2012.
Yeah, lucky for us, Equestria Daily started very early on to post our comics on their site, which introduced us to a wider audience, and to this day we are still making comics.
Well, in my case, they didn't post comics from the start, because at the time they had quality standards. But thanks to this, actually, it made me strive to become a better artist rather than draw anything. It was funny at the start in the fandom because everyone loved everything, any piece of fun, no matter how bad it was. So thanks to Equestria Daily, I could increase my skills.
Well, the Brothers comics are mostly very random parodies of MLP, where we try to do multiple jokes per comic. However, our most popular comics are the so-called simulators. Sorry, here's some window popping up, preventing me from... yes, the simulators, which are about cuteness and petting the ponies. But even in those comics, we try to do a lot of jokes. So, and now it's your part?
My comics are parodies of My Little Pony too, but I mostly use a bit darker themes. Also, I try to add some real-life approach, deconstruction, also a lot of criticism of the show because writing sometimes gets wonky, let's say that, and I'm more on the darker side than an average fan artist. Yeah. Basically, during my fan art career, if I might say so, I only made one notable thing. It was an official cover for IDW. It's seen in lower right corner. It was a retail incentive cover for Ponyville Mysteries #5. And, well, basically that's it.
Well, and to answer the question why we are doing this panel together, well, we've known each other for many years now and did a lot of collaborations. Therefore, this was a good opportunity to do another collaboration here in form of this panel, so to speak. And now, let's get to the first core segment of our presentation. There are, just a moment, every now and then there's a stupid window popping up. Okay. Yeah, I hope it doesn't come back now. Yeah. Well, there are many humor theories out there, but we will talk about our personal findings, which worked for us over the years. The first thing to say is that the question if a joke feels funny to you is very subjective. So don't be surprised when our examples do not seem funny to you. If that's the case, please hang in there.
And if you don't find it funny, thanks to this presentation, you will learn to find it funny.
Well, the following elements of a joke can be universally found in all kinds of jokes. So if you don't find ours funny, please try to analyze if you want jokes you do find funny, and you will most likely find them there. Sorry, the window again.
This is basically the list of humor theories that exist in real life. So you can see there's many theories, and to be fair, all of them are wrong.
That's debatable. Well, but first, what is laughing or funniness? Well, that's a question that... Oh, sorry, I forgot that slide, but yeah. What's laughing or funniness? Well, that's a question that people have asked for thousands of years and with which science and philosophy are struggling up until today. Nevertheless, we'll try to give an answer. Well, we think the funny feeling is most likely caused by a sudden and concentrated wave of positive emotion. Simpler said, a positive kick for the brain. And the mechanism that causes this is always that a kind of tension is built up, and when this tension gets suddenly relieved. That's why humor feels so good, because it's an explosion of good feelings. Let's look closer at the tension relief mechanism. There is a theory about how tickling works. Your body feels attacked, but since it's just some light touches, the body feels relieved. It's still a kind of attack though, therefore you often don't like being tickled. And this basic mechanism can be found in humor in general. There's something negative that gets twisted into something positive.
And there is one important element of almost all jokes, because they are almost always at somebody's expense, and basically there is no safe space in humor, and that's what we got into these times, that everyone is offended by every joke. Why? Because that's how it works. Jokes are always hurtful for someone, even if it's slapstick or just mean remark or laughing at someone's stupidity. Only plays on words are kind of safe, but they aren't really funny. So,
how all of this works will be explained in the next segment, which is about the first element of a joke. Balance. Let's use the tickling example further. Have you ever been tickled by someone you really don't like? Imagine a creepy stranger trying to tickle you. In most cases, it doesn't work. Most cases. At least I myself have experienced it. I'm a rather ticklish person, but when some mean guy in school tried to tickle me, it wasn't enjoyable and I didn't feel tickled. Maybe you have had similar experiences. There's actually a comic by Pony-Berserker on the subject of tickling, where Rainbow Dash suddenly leaps at Fluttershy and rubs her belly, but Fluttershy, well, seems not to like it that much, and they end up in court.
It is what it is.
And this is where we come to the aspect of balance in humor. There's always a balance between positive and negative, good and bad, happy and sad, order and disorder. But it's not an equal balance. There should always be more positive than negative. Even with very dark jokes. They might seem to be mostly negative, but the overwhelmingly positive part of them is, on a basic level at least, that it's not really happening and that's not happening to you.
Basically, when it comes to dark jokes, crossing the line might seem sometimes unfunny because people start being offended and take it realistically, but pushing the line even further, like crossing it twice, 3 times or more, always works and it's always funny, and you can see that in shows like South Park or Rick and Morty. They just go big and don't think. And many people just find it funny for that very reason. So it's not worth sometimes to do just a bit dark joke, just slap your reader in the face with this.
Okay. Jokes often have a serious setup that gets broken with a punchline. For example, in our comic about the episode Do Princesses Dream of Magic Sheep? Luna states, like in the actual episode, that she created the Tantabus to punish herself. Twilight tells her that she doesn't have to do that, because they can do it for her. Luna's reaction to this is, the serious, or better said, negative aspect, Luna punishing herself, then the others wanting to punish her, gets destroyed, so to speak. And with that, the whole thing becomes mostly positive, with Luna being happy about it and stuff. It's a relief, so to say. It also works the other way around. Sometimes the setup is absurd or weird, and the punchline is something that suddenly lets it all make sense, which again makes the whole thing, like set on a basic level, mostly positive compared to the absurd, or better said, negative setup. For example, in this comic, Gilda yells at Fluttershy, as you can see, and Pinky tells her that she better shouldn't do that because Fluttershy might use her butterflies on her, which sounds rather ridiculous. Then Fluttershy shows us her butterflies. Okay. The second element is surprise, also known as bait and switch. Not always, but most of the time, it's important to make the joke a true surprise. At the very least, it significantly increases the likelihood of a joke being funny to someone. For this, the audience must be caught off guard. We would like to show an example of what we mean with this collaboration we did many years ago. Apple Bloom, we've got to tell you something. I'm your mother. Big Mac is your father. And he's my father too.
Can you get any worse?
And Granny Smith is your sister.
Wait, that's not true. She's too old.
Nah, she isn't old. She just didn't turn out so well. You know, inbreeding. Apple Bloom, you're awake. By the way, I never told you the story how you're born.
I don't know. I don't want to know.
Well, then I tell you where phones come from. Oh, so you already know. But reaching back to the balance element, the surprise must still make some kind of sense, even if this sense is absurd. It still has to have some relation to the build-up. If it comes totally out of nowhere, it will most likely not work. In the example we just showed, there is the twist at the end that it all was just a dream, and that on its own would be too vague. Because, well, anything could be just a dream. But here we have something that justifies it. It's Luna, the dream horse, pranking Apple Bloom. That way, the surprise has a logical basis.
Although there's a running joke in the fandom that Apple Bloom is actually Applejack's daughter, and it sometimes comes up. We all heard that this kind of jokes, right? So there is some added logic on several levels.
Just had to find a place. The third and last element is concentration. Like said before, the feeling of funniness is most likely a sudden burst of positive emotion. The keyword here is sudden. If a punchline is dragged out too long, the explosion will most likely fizzle out.
Boo!
That's also why a punchline is called a punchline, because it's a sudden hit in your face, so to say. An example would be this comic by Pony-Berserker.
Well, and you will always have at least one friend here too.
Great, friend zoned again. If it isn't short and fast, the moment of surprise will pass. Of course, it is possible to make a dragged out joke funny. The unexpected dragging out of a joke can actually make it even funnier, because it goes on even though you thought it was over. But that is hard to pull off, and it would also get old pretty fast. You wanted at this point something?
No.
Oh, okay. So we recommend strike fast and clean. Now that we talked about what we think the elements of a joke are, we go on to the second segment of our presentation. Types of jokes and how they presumably work. Of course, there are many types of jokes in the world. But today we will focus just on those we personally use the most. Comically missing the point. A typical technique in storytelling is to let the protagonist make a bad decision so that they have to struggle with it and can learn from it in the end. To use an example from the MLP show, in the episode Horseplay, Twilight stands between the decision to tell Celestia that she is a bad actress or to withhold that information. She chooses the bad path, which leads to Celestia getting angry and Twilight learning her lesson in the end. Something similar is often done in comedy, even though for a different purpose and to an often more extreme degree. Characters will often simply miss the point. They make a bad decision and will many times face the consequences.
Basically here in this example, Scootaloo doesn't see a difference between getting a cutie mark or being branded as a horse. You know this thing that they...
Okay. Since the missing of a point is often so stupid and illogical, we again have our negative element that serves as the basis for our joke. Nevertheless, it is still important that the actual joke is somehow surprising and creative. Here are some examples. Derpy is at the Department of Names and Identification. And what does she do? 1 dozen muffins, please. This leads to her getting her now official name, Muffins. But she still just wants to get her breakfast. Another example. Cadence tells Shining Armor that she's pregnant. He asks, who's the father? Deconstruction. This type of joke consists in deconstructing the inner logic, the rules we are used to of a fictional story or world. In the case of MLP, this could mean, for example, that Pinkie Pie, since she consumes cartoonish amounts of sweets, has to face the real-world consequences of that behavior. You take an aspect of a show that most likely wouldn't work in real life, and then you portray how it would turn out in real life. The ironic part is that you, so to say, break something, the negative thing, by applying logic to it, the positive thing, but like said, on a very basic level. However, that isn't the only form of deconstruction. You can also take an aspect of a show and apply a different logic to it. For example, something harmless that suddenly turns grim. Like in Pony-Berserker's comic, Thanks for Nothing, where Fluttershy thinks it's best to confront Rainbow with a blunt truth. A truth more grim than in the show. She says that Tank isn't going to hibernate. He's going to die, and there's nothing to do about it. This naturally shocks the others, and Fluttershy tries to soften it with the remark, On the bright side, at least you've got a pet that buries itself. Other examples. Concerning the episode Party Pooped, where the yaks complain about things not being perfect, we made a comic where Pinky handles these guests a bit more appropriately. Naturally, the yaks would declare war on the ponies for that. But if they did so, they would be confronted with a hefty dose of reality. A little bit similar is the comic about the feud between the Hoofhills and the McCalls. In reality, conflicts like that can escalate quickly. And here, Fluttershy supported this process with a bit of science.
Go on. I want to see my panel first.
Ah, yes. No.
The construction in... The construction in the fan art can be added in many ways. And one of them is to add elements that are omitted in the actual show. For example, this panel is from a comic titled Friends with Benefits. So the expectations were much different than when it turns out that it's about welfare benefits and why Snails gets them because he's slower than everyone and he needs some real life help. And that's where benefits come from. And the fun part is when people might rethink the whole show about it or just think, oh, I never thought about that before. And that's one of the ways you can apply the construction. There's some of the real life examples.
Okay. Criticism. Like said, jokes always have always an element of disorder in them, be it something bad, something stupid, or something contradictory. And therefore, it can be a good source for jokes to look at something like MLP episodes and point out flaws. An example, which is not a comic, that illustrates that would be the Choose the Biggest Sin of episode X.
So many people hate me for this pose. I get actually sometimes hateful messages how I'm the real hater and how I can't appreciate the show at all.
Yeah, I wanted just to say on Pony-Berserker Steven Duck page. Sometimes it can be funny enough if a flaw wasn't obvious until you point it out. But most of the time, at times, the flaw should be the base for the actual joke. You take that element and then you build something upon it. In the episode Hurricane Fluttershy, during the grand finale with a tornado, where every single bit of wing power is needed, Spitfire does nothing. She gives an explanation that somebody else will handle it. We double down on that notion by referring to the often voiced criticism that Celestia does nothing. Then at the end, we add another often voiced criticism, namely the one that Fluttershy always learns the same lesson. Even the show addressed that complaint. Well, another example would be the comic Terrible Event Horizon. We are at the end of a season 6 finale, and Chrysalis calls Thorax the worst changeling ever. Thorax says no, and then he evolves into the form we know today. And he says, "Now I am." This refers to the opinion of many people who don't like his new design. That's a question of taste, but the criticism exists, which makes it a potentially useful asset.
However, one who creates comics with criticism towards the show, that there are fans who just can't take any kind of criticism aimed at the show and will just pester you forever or insult you or rage quit your fan page or whatever. They will cause a lot of drama. So when you create fan art with criticism, you just have to brace yourself for that, because there is no out of this. If you are wondering why people are like this, it's compared to like patriotism or nationalism. They just take things very seriously and will defend it to their death.
Dark or mean jokes. Provocation is a potent tool, since it gives you a lot of fuel for your jokes. Like in the tickle example, this is what your attack is and what makes it really feel like a kind of attack. The main reason why these jokes don't feel just bad is, like mentioned before, that it's not really happening, or at least not to you. Like said, there is more positive in the equation than negative, if you feel it's funny, that is. Because many times, people will not like dark jokes because they are dark. In other words, it's too dark for them individually. The reason can be the amount of darkness itself, or that it somehow gets too personal. Like, for example, when someone hates cancer jokes because one of their relatives died from it. Therefore, crossing the line is risky for the viewer's reaction, and crossing the line twice or more can make it funnier, but also adds more risk every time. But it's exactly that risk, that line crossing, that can make a joke especially funny, you know, like with a forbidden fruit. Some examples. In this comic about the episode It Isn't the Main Thing About You, Rarity feels more dominant and powerful thanks to her new look. She then takes it too far and becomes more aggressive. And, sorry, my hair got in the way. Where was I?
She becomes more aggressive.
Ah, yeah. And she goes even further. You can read, just read. Yes, okay, yeah. Well, I can't see it here in front of me, that's why I didn't read.
I don't see from here.
Oh, okay. But I think everyone has read it now again.
Yeah, a bit too late for that.
Well, sorry, I had. Well, Starlight and Twilight seemed not to show much concern. You are going to intervene here, right? Only if we hear him scream, or we hear him shout or cry. Twilight also comically misses the point of Starlight's comic, by the way, reaching back to that type of joke. Okay, another example. In this comic, it's cider season, but Applejack is out of cider again. This is understandably a bummer for Rainbow Dash. Berry Punch, who is known in the fandom as the town drunk, cheerfully comforts her with, "Don't take it so hard." This confuses Rainbow, since, like said, Berry is an alcoholic. She asks, "How are you taking it so well?" Berry responds, "I don't." Applejack managed to stop her. "Wait, I have an emergency sperm rack for cases like these. Only 20 bits. But once it's empty, want to say something?
Oh, sorry, I drifted away. So basically, darkness in MLP might be obviously updated via mentioned deconstruction tropes. Imagine like you know the idea of geldings, yeah, so castrated horses. Imagine you apply this real-life trope into the MLP society, because in humans we also had castrated humans, right? So if you put this extreme case, you can create something really dark, and you have two ways. Either you can even it out saying it was just a dream, or you can just go nuts and all the way into the abyss. The shock value itself might be entertaining on its own. It might make people look at the show in a different way, or just say that you are crazy and insane. Another thing might be that in MLP, characters usually try to be nice or are portrayed as such, even to the point where personal willing suspension of disbelief no longer works. In one comic I made, Quibble Pants' girlfriend was mean to her daughter and stressed that she will be dating Quibble Pants and her daughter won't ruin her relationship again. The problem was that some people took it a bit too personally, more personally than I ever expected, because, well, it turns out the episode was influenced by Oswald Pattons and his wife and daughter, and then there were people who went through something like this personally, and there was a bit of a mess in the comments section. But basically, being mean in a comic might trigger people who associate with certain characters, and you just have to brace yourself for that. And there are always more people who actually enjoy this because they can take the joke, any joke.
Cuteness overload. For this segment, we have a special guest who will help us demonstrate it. Cuter, please, Rainbow Dash. Cuter. Cuter. We are not there yet. I think I made my point. This type of joke, this is a type of joke we, the brothers, used a lot.
Because I don't like cuteness, that's why I don't use it.
Sorry, okay. Okay. No, just the image. I just got the image. Okay, yeah, yes. Like I said, we used it a lot, and I mean really a lot. And one might ask, if jokes consist of positive and negative parts, what is the negative in cuteness? Well, in order to become funny, the amount of cuteness must be so high that it becomes ridiculous. That's when it becomes, on a basic level, negative. For some... For example, this scene from season 1. Or let's not forget Fluttershy's legendary first scene. You can use the cringe of too much cuteness as your negative element in order to fuel the joke. But most of the time, to be safe, we mix it with another normal joke, so to say. Some examples. This comic refers to the episode Just for Sidekicks. If you remember, there is a scene where the angel is with the Cutima Crusaders, and they are swooning about his adorableness. Then they notice that they themselves are adorable. And Angel reacts to that accordingly. In this comic, little Chrysalis wants to eat a mouse, while quoting a line from Austin Powers. The mouse is having none of it and fights back. For this transgression, Chrysalis gives it the cold shoulder. And the mouse is like, guess I live.
Go on, I said my part. I said my part.
And last but not least, references. This is one of the most popular types of jokes. And by popular, I don't necessarily mean popular with the audience, more like that it's used very much in comedy. But what's so attractive about referencing stuff? Well, basically, it's tapping on a resource that already exists. People already know these things and have some kind of feeling attached to it. Seemingly, the human brain really likes to recognize things. That's why often the pure reference to something can be entertaining enough. But we personally prefer to do a joke on top of the reference. At the very least, in the way how the reference is used. Just like the sense a punchline has to contain, the reference should also make sense in your context. It should match something in the situation. Like when a character uses a reference line, for example in Thanks for the Memories. When Rainbow Dash destroys the weather factory and the giant snowball shoots towards Ponyville, Twilight says, "Brace yourselves, winter is coming." A line which most of you will know from Game of Thrones, or at least the memes from it. And this line makes sense in this context because, well, winter is coming in a way. If Twilight had said, "May the force be with you," it would make no sense and it wouldn't feel very funny. Now, like I said, this is a very popular type of joke also in our case. Therefore, we have so many examples in our comics that we don't know where to start. But since memes are a big thing nowadays, here are a few ponified memes. Now we would like to talk about some techniques we use for developing jokes. You can use them as advice, but keep in mind that everyone is different and that you must find out what works best for you. That being said, let's start. Brainstorming. This is the most universal and simple approach, but it doesn't make brainstorming easy. Most of the time, it's just brooding or ruminating. It takes time, calm, and effort, and is something you must concentrate on. You need some determination to stay on target, because the temptation of doing something else is your greatest enemy here. For me, it works the best when I fully concentrate on it for at least an hour, without any distractions or interruptions. And what if your brain isn't enough? Use several brains. If you work together, there will be more input and ideas. Probably the best part of not working alone is that you get immediate reactions to the ideas. On top of that, you will inspire each other. The ideas will bounce back and forth among you and gain quality with each bounce. That is at least what works for us, the brothers. Everyone is different and must find the best approach for themselves.
For me personally, brainstorming basically never works because it ends up in forced ideas that you focus on something. I need to create something, and then you go out with anything that comes up. You can make, for example, 10 bad ideas, and you will take one bad idea. So for me, it always worked better when I just waited for the idea to come. It's called Eureka moment. We'll be talking about it later.
In a moment, yeah, we will talk about exactly
That's what
that.
I said.
Yeah. Okay. Surprising. We talked about this before, but we want to emphasize this point even further because it's a very helpful tool. try to take the audience off guard. Your punchline should, like said before, come suddenly, short and unexpected. Be creative and think of ways how to lure the audience into your trap, so to say. Point first in the wrong direction. Point first in the wrong direction. Raise false expectations. Like in this comic, where Pinky captures the jerk Sven Gallop and is ready to go all cupcakes on him. Then she just scratches a plate. A joke from the movie Ace Ventura, we've stolen. But keep in mind that your surprise can't be something totally out of nowhere. It still has to make some kind of sense, even if it's weird. In this comic, Discord takes off his head like a mask and reveals the face of John Delancey. Even though it's weird, it still makes some sense, since John Delancey is Discord's voice actor, and Discord is certainly someone to break the fourth wall. The main six react accordingly. Eureka moments. Often, ideas will come to you when you don't expect them. I emphasized how important it is to stay concentrated, but it is also important to take breaks. The brain often needs some time to cool down and to think about other things. The subconscious will keep working in the background. Therefore, it will often happen that you have a good idea, for example, under the shower. Sometimes your brain will suddenly come up with ideas when you have slept over it. Don't overwork yourself and let your brain digest. So when you are stuck and can't come up with anything, just let go for a while and do something else or relax.
And for me personally, it's just the main approach. I only relax and ideas will eventually come. But to be fair, I have like 40 pages of 40 pages of ideas I created and didn't use, but I plan to make them sometimes, maybe if the fandom still exists at the time.
Well, but like said before, when you are in the process of thinking up ideas, don't give up easily, don't procrastinate, and don't take breaks all the time. There must be some effort in your thinking before you take breaks.
And basically this is where we disagree. Because I think that about thinking, it doesn't really take that much effort. Because, as I said, if you don't work on schedule like you aren't a professional writer and just do things for fun, then forcing ideas, in my opinion, isn't the best approach. You can see in professional work in many TV series when the writers work on the schedule and then create episodes of any series that are just unbearable and bad. Why? Because they just had to create something and they just did it, and that was the effect of brainstorming.
Yeah, like said, everyone has to find his approach, which works for themselves. Where was I? Yes. Yes, I had one. Sorry. Okay, and lastly, we have trial and error. We think that overall the best, but probably most underwhelming, advice we can give you is to just do a lot of stuff and to learn by trial and error. Think up ideas, execute them, show them to an audience, and then analyze the reactions. What did work and what did not? Sorry,
I would chime in, but we say listen to the audience, you need to remember that fans shouldn't influence you too much, because these are just those who voice their opinion, and many people simply remain silent. You just have to take into considerations what they said maybe ask a trusted person what they really think, if they are able to be honest enough, like Applejack. And then you can take this or reject. Many people just criticize for the sake of it, or they just hate you and write mean comments. And among fan artists, many fan artists just have this approach that if someone criticizes them, they are just idiots. Like, oh, he criticized me, he knows nothing. Well, the good approach is to actually take into considerations what they said. You can call them an idiot, but actually you need to think about it, what they said.
Okay, sorry. Yes, a few more images to this sequence. Well, basically it can be said, if you want to get good, you will have to just do it. Well, and that's the end of our presentation. Thank you. But hopefully this was interesting to you and maybe even helpful. Even if our theories turn out to be completely false, maybe they can at least inspire one of you to create a better theory. At this point...
Just remember about theories. There is another theory that says that all humor is actually random and there is nothing scientific you can apply to this, because if you notice, there is always this, in most cases, almost always, these are keywords. There is no really one thing that works every single time. So having this said, all of this in this presentation, you also have to have this in mind. Humor is often just about randomness.
Yeah, at the end, will add some words too. First, of course, is the reason I didn't say anything is because I made most of the pictures used here, also specifically for this presentation, and by which I had the right to not having to say anything. And yeah, the thing is that, like I said, it's very subjective, and you cannot please. Of course, you can never please 100% of the people, but when you find your way of your type of humor, the things you do, then you will also find your crowd, and you can try to excel in that field. I mean, we are usually often focused on reaching as much people as possible. You could say that in a very technical sense, for example, the simulators were a very calculated form of our comics, and that in the MLP fandom, people like cute stuff, we give them cute stuff. But as said, we also like to add always some jokes to it, so that it has value beyond that. Yeah, I think I'm done.
Okay, and one more thing I want to say. On the subject of trying to understand things, even if it's something so mysterious like humor, I think if you want to think about it and to try to understand how it maybe actually works, I would say don't give up too easily, because then if people who pursue scientific subjects would give up too easy, we wouldn't have any progress. Well, good. And lastly, I want just give a short thanks to Dracoblair, because he proofread my script. And of course, thank you all for listening.
Actually, and there is a part for questions and answers, so it's not actually lastly. So basically, first 5 people who ask us interesting questions will get a free printed comic with our signatures. So
you can show.
Show. It's a simple print, but it's on a good quality paper, and it has our signatures. And you came here to see us, so we want it.
So if you can't come up with something, just take something. This is your bribe.
Yeah.
So if you guys are in the process of making a new comic, does it ever happen that you have some discrepancies and you can't reach a point of the agreement and there's a little bit of fighting? What do you do to get out of that situation?
That's an interesting question when you're stuck. I think, at least personally for me, when I'm stuck when creating a comic, or jokes.
Wenn man ein Disagreement hat.
Yeah, when a disagreement. The thing is that, of course, it's always you should try to find a common ground, but sometimes your ideas can be too different, and when you won't find any. But something you can also do when doing it alone is that go back and rethink the joke. Like I noticed it in itself in story writing and everything pertaining to it. If you're stuck at some point, you really have to go back further and further to see, because sometimes the flaw goes a long way. But yeah, as I said, of course, the one thing we have also to say about the fact of disagreements and such is that we don't disagree that much. We grew pretty much up like twins and usually are on the same terms with most things.
And when it comes to me, I have a friend who is known as Midnight Base in the fandom, and he often helps me out with writing the comic. And here it's the same story that we don't disagree too much, but I basically value his whatever he says, and if he says the joke is bad, I just don't do it, and I can take any other idea I have. That's it. Okay. Any other question?
Yes. I wanted to ask. You have a lot of ideas for comics, but not every idea gets really pursued into a comic. What do you say? What is the percentage of ideas that aren't developed into jokes?
In our case, I would say about 10%, but it fluctuates. It can be some of the time it can be like 1%, but sometimes we are on a roll and it can be like 30%.
What you can add here is that this is also something, or better said, the point in brainstorming, at least if that's something for you, in that you write 100 ideas and 99 are crap. But that's usually how it goes. But you only need that one good idea and you have what you wanted. But of course, it takes work writing down all that, but it's like to basically say the principle of brainstorming is also to get crap out of your head and like just write it down, then it's there and then it won't bother you. Or maybe you have then that one idea and that one and combine them and suddenly you have what you want.
And with my approach, of course, I have less ideas if I try to brainstorm, but obviously I have more unused ideas that wait to develop, because you see, when sometimes you get an idea and save it for later, after some time, it might evolve into something better. I had some comics where I created the idea for like 2 or 3 years before I actually made the comic, and the idea was changed a few times over the course of that time. So I try to save every idea, but usually it's a better idea than it would be with brainstorming. But it's my personal approach only. So, but when you ask about the exact numbers, I don't think I can say that because I don't know. Obviously, I have more unused ideas than those I turned into comics.
Do you make drawing for a living, or do you have actual jobs? Don't take it seriously, don't take it wrong, okay?
Yeah, no, it's, he has a job. He has an actual life. He studied computer science. I went to an art school eventually because that's what I wanted to do. And yeah, I personally try to live from it. But well, it's a build up. Usually the best way is Patreon. But the thing is, nowadays you have to do things outside of Pony to reach more people, to and see that your stuff grows. But it's hard to live from your art, but if you find something that people really like, you can go far. And the easiest way, if you make a Patreon and to draw, to get people to spend a lot of money on you, is to adhere to their fetishes, but that's something you must be willing to do, and I'm not quite willing to do that.
Didn't know you were an SFF.
I don't do that. But I'm just saying that's the easy way to money, so to speak, when you do Patreon. Because that's now the people who really spend a lot on their sites.
Basically, we all think that if we suddenly die, we wouldn't like to have a computer full of Rule 34 drawings to be found. So yeah, we just avoid this topic entirely. That's why we don't make tons of money of it. And another thing is that we are also kind of lazy because, we would just set up a vendor booth and sell some prints or buttons or anything, but we don't bother with that. So if you ask if we make a living of art, it's not quite that way.
Then one last question. Can I have a signature draw piece, and can I make selfies with you all at the ending? Okay.
Did you talk afterwards about it, because we have to stop almost.
So yeah, just one more question.
First of all, thank you.
Sorry, yeah?
Thank you for this panel. I have a question for you, the brothers, and after for Pony-Berserker. For the brothers, how do you work? You both draw, or one does the script and one draw? And
we think up ideas and write the comics most of the times together. But the most of the drawing is done by him. From time to time, I do some of the line art or coloring, but like I said, he studied art, and so he does the most drawing.
Okay. And for Pony-Berserker, can you tell us a bit more about Berzi? Where does he come from? What does he represent for you, your OC?
My chanting course, right?
Your OC, Berzi, the changing.
It started as a joke because one of my Patreon supporters had a changing OC, and I created a one-off character for one picture, and sometimes he caught up, and I made another picture and another. Then I added some fake backstory why I came up with it, and later it just started living its own life. Some people actually started creating fan art and so on.
Thank you.
Rob, speak
What?
till the end. Speak till the end, it's okay. It's just about time to finish your panel.
Yeah, we already over time.
Okay, so that's it.
Okay.
You can take your comment.
And the last one is first come, first serve.
Yeah,
so
we have free prints, first come, first serve.
And thank you. I just started to clap, and it was a reflex.